What's up, guys? Russ from Backyard Boatworks. So this video is actually part 2 of a video that I did several weeks ago, actually maybe even about more than a month ago, and actually a viewer had reminded me that I never did part 2. So this is part 2 of how I prep my MDF molds to get them ready to make the fiberglass parts. So this is going to be a quick little video just kind of walking through the steps that I take to put a surface on the molds and prep that surface and get it ready to lay the glass. I'll link to part 1 down below, and I'll also link to other videos where you can see the actual lamination process of the molds. So in this video you're going to see 2 MDF molds that I made for different parts. One's a larger lid for a hatch receiver, and the other one's a 6x6 lid and receiver mold. The 6x6 mold was requested by a customer that he was going to use to put it in the deck of his boat to access a fuel sending unit. So get right to it. What I'm doing here is getting ready to lay paint on the surface of the MDF. So most people would use a tooling gel coat to do this. However, GelCoat does not stick to MDF as well as epoxy does. So I use this product called Sherloxane 800, and it's an epoxy polyurethane paint made by Sherwin-Williams. So this is part of their marine coatings line of paints and coatings. But being that it's an epoxy, it has excellent adhesion to the MDF, and also because it has a polyurethane additive, it has excellent gloss, making the surface polishable and ideal for pulling fiberglass molds. So here I'm just mixing up this Sherloxane 800, and I'm going to be putting it into my pressure pot gun. This pressure pot gun has a 3.5 millimeter tip. So one thing to note since I made this video is I no longer use this pressure pot gun, and the reason is I ended up buying a 3M AccuSpray HGP pressure assisted cup gun, and I will also link to that video down below where I talk about using that gun to shoot gel coat. The main reason I stopped using it is because cleaning this pressure pot gun was a royal pain in the A, and it was just taking me too long, and I ultimately ended up clogging it up with epoxy and ruined it. So needless to say, I no longer use it, and I've been using the 3M gun ever since. So here I'm just starting to put down the epoxy polyurethane, and the pot life on this paint is quite long, probably a couple hours, so you don't have to move that fast with this paint. And I'm gonna put probably 2 to 3 heavy coats because I'm going to be wet sanding some of this off. So I want to make sure that I have a nice layer of this paint on here so that I can wet sand and buff it, get it ready for the lamination process. Alright, so here it is the next day after I put the epoxy down. So this material, depending on the temperature, takes 12 to 14 hours, maybe a little bit more to cure. So here it is fully cured. Now the thing with MDF molds is, in the other video you'll see that I used Bondo to make the radius here down in the corner of this lid. But the problem is when you're sanding MDF, the sandpaper causes the MDF to have fuzzies, and they kind of raise up from the surface. They're really hard to see, but they're there, and you won't really notice it until after you put the paint down. So what I did to the MDF is I actually wet sanded it with 400 grit before I did the mold, and you can see here these are the fuzzies that are standing up in the epoxy paint because I missed sanding that area. So you want to make sure that you wet sand with a fine grit before you put your epoxy on, or you will end up getting that rough surface. So here I am just wet sanding the larger lid mold because I'm working outside and it took a little bit to cure. I had some dust nubs in it, and now I'm going to move to a heavy cut buffing compound. And here I'm just using my small 3.5 inch polisher with a heavy cut yellow foam polishing disc, wheel, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so now we're going to add some mold release wax to these MDF molds. So something to keep in mind here is you don't have to kill yourself when you're making these molds, and they don't have to be perfectly flawless. If you're watching this video, you're probably going to be making a mold and you're going to be making one part. So I wouldn't stress too much in making your molds perfectly flawless. Just get the shape down, get them coated, and pull your part, and you can go back and use some high build primer or some fairing compound to fill in some little imperfections. So don't stress it. So here I'm just going to put on some part all wax with a regular shop cloth. I'm going to lay it on pretty heavy, let it dry for a minute, and then buff it back off by hand. Alright, so the next step is we're going to lay some PVA, which is polyvinyl alcohol. It's basically water soluble liquid plastic. So this just puts one more layer of protection between your gel coat and the surface of the mold, just to stop any adhesion to the mold. So I'm going to use a regular HVLP gravity feed gun. I think this is a 2.0 millimeter tip, and I'm going to put light coats first and let that flash off, and those are going to be tack coats. If you come in and shoot it super heavy right away, then the PVA is going to clump and it's going to run, and you're going to have runs in your PVA, and then those runs are going to show up in your final part. So super light coats, let it dry. Fortunately, it's very warm in South Florida, so this PVA dries very quick. But if you're working in a cooler climate, this could take quite some time for it to fully cure. So you don't want to put your second, third, and fourth coats of PVA until those prior coats are fully dried. So again, I'm going to put probably 4 or 5 coats of this on, and it's going to build a nice thick, maybe 1 to 2 mil thickness of PVA on the mold. Alright, so the final step in prepping the molds is to put down the gel coat. So the gel coat is going to be your top layer of your final piece. So when you pop it out, the piece will be white. And here I'm just using a super inexpensive general purpose white gel coat. I picked this up at the hardware store. I think it's like $10 or $12 per quart, and just making sure that I get it sprayed into the corners as good as I can. And I'm probably going to put 2 or 3 heavy coats of this gel coat on, and then I'm going to let it sit overnight. Working in Florida, I probably could move a little bit faster to the next step to do my lamination, but you want to make sure that you give the gel coat more than enough time to cure and set up, because if you start to lay your polyester resin on top of not fully set up gel coat, the styrenes will start to attack the gel coat, and you'll start to have issues where the gel coat will fail, and it will cause alligatoring, where it will start to ripple and cause what looks like alligator skin in the surface of your final part. So this wraps up the mold prep portion of this video, which was kind of the reason for making this video. But I do have the footage of me laminating these pieces here, which you're going to see in a second, and I'm going to play it through in high speed. So if you're curious just to watch the process of doing the lamination, you can watch it through here in fast motion, or you can go back to some of my other videos where I go into more depth about laminating these molds to make the final part. So you see here I'm just using some polyester resin. putting it into the mold, and I'm going to start with my first skin coat, which is a 1.5 ounce chop strand mat. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me. I appreciate it, guys. Again, if you have any questions, leave a comment down below, and appreciate it. See you in the next one.